The show is a proud member of the Retirement Podcast Network. This show is dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement, but to have the confidence, because you're doing the work, to really lean in and rock it. Hey, Roger Whitney here. Welcome. So today on the show, we're going to do our first ever mini case study with Sarah on some actions she took after having her question answered on the show. And there's a lot of gold in there that you and I can take in terms of really doing this, not just thinking about it, but doing it. In addition to that, we're going to answer some of your listener questions. And in our Rock Life segment, Bobby and I, Dr. Bobby DUBOIS, are focused on building energy so we can show up for our retirement. And we're going to talk about rucking. I'll tell you what, it almost came off like an infomercial because we're both very excited about it, but we think it's something that you might want to consider. As always, we will send out a 6-shot Saturday email with a summary of the show, links to resources that we mention. So if you love the show, you're really going to love our 6-shot Saturday email. You can sign up for that at 6shotsaturday.com and listen to the podcast on a Saturday morning with all the links to the resources right there. So let's move on to our first ever mini case study. One thing I like about the 6-shot Saturday email is that people reply and they share, sometimes in great detail, their questions or actions that they've taken. And we've decided to highlight some mini case studies on actions that listeners are taking, real retirees in the wild, and what they're doing based on their own learnings and things we talk about in the show. So I got an email a few months ago from Sarah updating me on her initial question that we had answered on the show. We'll have a link to that in 6-shot Saturday, although I'm not quite sure where it is, Nicole, so we'll have to maybe find that. I think it was in January that we answered this question. So I'm going to read the email from Sarah. I'll try to summarize it a little bit, and then we can talk about the actions she's taken so maybe you can take some more action in whatever plan you're working on. So here's what Sarah says. Sarah says, "Greetings, Roger. As you may or not remember, you addressed my question on January 18th, 2023 show." There you go, Nicole. We got the link, so we'll put a link to that initial answer. "I reached out to you regarding my less than ideal retirement. I described myself as a 60-year-old single, divorced, burnt out healthcare worker with inadequate savings, dwindling stamina, and some health issues that were making work a challenge." Sarah goes on that you suggested that perhaps I was trying to solve the wrong problem. Instead of solving for how do I save enough, which I think was the crux of the question, which couldn't be done, Sarah says, you suggested answering the question, how do you design a life that can bring you joy even if it requires you working, but working at a pace in doing something that you can sustain and still have some time freedom? That's a very different question, by the way, than how do I save enough? Sarah goes on, you validated the challenge of being a healthcare worker, including the physical, emotional stress. It made me realize that I didn't want to feel this way anymore and that job wasn't worth my physical and emotional well-being. You proposed multiple pathways forward, which gave me perspective and permission to think outside the box. You deemed my situation normal for a lot of people. I had lost the game. Even though I wasn't going to make the All-Stars, I still could play. Retirement life may not be what I had planned or hoped for whatever reason, but I still could have a good life. You gave me hope. So that's Sarah. And then she goes on. What's interesting is that you started this show with a statement, take a breath, look around. I know you didn't mean me specifically, but it definitely spoke to me like a slap upside the head, she says. I was stuck in my limiting thinking, ruminating about the past, chronic worry about the future, and well, just plain feeling sorry for myself. I decided to take a breath and look around, and as you suggested, and do so with gratitude and possibility, and I decided to focus on my situation in a positive light to design a life that could be sustainable and bring me joy. And I also decided to focus on the idea of creating a plan of record, as you often put it. So this is what I did. So here's the path that Sarah went after that conversation via the podcast, I guess. I created a budget on which I'm willing to live on, my base great life, and I stuck to it. This gave me a concrete amount that I needed to bring in to sustain myself. And the second one, when I first read it, really shocked me. I quit my job. Scariest thing ever, but I knew this job was eating me alive and I could not sustain the path and endure the job place situation much longer. I am still licensed professional, so I can always return to the field down the road if needed. Okay, so she quit her job. Whew. Next thing she did, I moved. I moved from a rural area to a town setting about an hour away. My rent is the same, but I have free heat, water, a tiny electric bill for my one-bedroom apartment. It is on the town's main street. Think out the door to the coffee shops, to the bookstores, to the restaurants. I had to downsize significantly, but the purging was therapeutic. I have room for only what matters. Okay, so based on this, she quit her job and she moved. And she said, I got a part-time job that steps away from my apartment. I work at a quaint little gift store and I love it. Of course, this represents a significant reduction in pay, but I am so much happier and feel better physically. I took my widow's Social Security benefit. I moved some money that I had saved into a 5-year CD ladder starting in July, and I will start cashing out these CDs annually to supplement my income and allow what I do have in retirement to grow. I'm using the marketplace for health insurance because of my low income, my premium's low. I have started to work more on myself and try and meet people. And she talks about starting to exercise again, etc. And she ends it, my life is not perfect, but is so much better. And she thanks me for the role that I played in helping navigate this. And she encourages me to continue to incorporate people like her. I had tears at the end of this email, so I replied back to her, of course, and then asked her permission to share some of this. Oh, actually, this is for Nicole as well as you, was January 18th, 2023. She reminded me because when she replied that I could use it, just not use her name, she said, I would like to think of myself as a woman of action, but it took a year of me listening to your response on the podcast over and over to actually internalize the possibilities, journal different pathways of what if, crunch the numbers, strategize the timing of changes, etc. And she includes and many tears. And she shares some thanks to me, which is wonderful and heartwarming. It feels liberating to have taken my next basic step and to know that I can revise my plan as needed. When the time comes, you better know that I'll be reaching out back to you. Okay, you can do that, Sarah, quote unquote. There's a lot to unpack there for you and I, regardless of your situation. Now, obviously, her situation was extreme. She was drowning in work and burnout and ruminating on what occurred and then fear about the future. Now, you step back for a second. Is Sarah's plan sound? She quit a well-paying job. She downsized to an apartment. I don't know if she sold a house or not. She works at a gift store. That doesn't seem permanent. We all could think of a lot of things that could go wrong here. Just, I'm sure, as Sarah can do that. But isn't that the case always? In whatever plan you put together, there are a million things that can go wrong that you can't solve for. And while you're ruminating on that, time is ticking. Your life, in whatever situation you're in, is moving forward. And remember, time's asymmetric. As we get older, you got to take care of you now as much as you older in life. So this is not a perfect plan for Sarah, but she identified action. She took action in little baby steps. And Sarah, you say you took over a year or about a year to do this. I would probably disagree with that. You ruminated on this. You journaled. You thought about it. You strategized. Just you activating that in your thinking. A lot is going on there subconsciously and consciously that got you to the action point. That's a lot of building that plan of record, dialing in your budget, knowing whether you can live it on it or not. You did that work and put a high resolution to that. And then when you acted a year later, you were able to act quickly and with conviction because you did all of this other work that felt like it wasn't work. That's how I often feel when I'm talking with people in the retirement masterclass within the club, because the first half of it just feels like, wow, when are we going to get to the spreadsheets? We're setting up, we're thinking, we're doing exercises. But that is what gets you into action. So bravo for you, Sarah. And what I wanted to pull out for all of us is one, this concept of a plan of record, that where you make decisions of what the plan is going to be. That's intimidating. And many of us can waste our life not making decisions because we want to keep our options open. And the process of building a plan of record forces you to make decisions. But these decisions are two-way decisions almost always. You can go back, as Sarah said, I still have my licenses. I'm in the healthcare industry. I can go back and get some other position and maybe get something that's more healthy environment for her. So, but by going through the process of a plan of record, it forces you to decide today, and you need to give yourself grace to do that, knowing that it's not typically a one-way decision. You can go back and change your mind or make adjustments. So that's the first thing I think that I want to bring out from this case study. The second thing is, in my vernacular, agile retirement management is focused as much on our process for making decisions around Roth conversions and long-term care, as much on the process of making those decisions as all the facts and details of the issue itself. Because if you can improve your decision-making and improve it consistently over time, that changes trajectories of things. It definitely helps. And part of improving your decision-making is really paying attention to the questions that you ask. If I recall, Sarah started off with, how can I save enough? Where can I squeeze more money to save? When in her situation, it was evidently clear to her that there's nothing left in this rock to squeeze. And time is compressed. So even if she could squeeze more money to save, it wasn't going to have the time to work, to grow, to solve all her problems. So what I proposed to her, and I don't recall the exact conversation, was just, well, maybe you're solving the wrong problem. How do you create a life that you don't want to retire from? Essentially was the rephrasing of the question. And I think you want to be more creative and poke around this, because if you don't, what will happen is if you define a problem one way, well, you've just put blinders on to all the other options and pathways available to you. So it really limits creativity. So you got to be really careful on how you frame questions. So Sarah, girl, I am so excited for you. I know a lot of stuff can go wrong, and I know you know that. Life just happens. But man, you sound like you're in a much more powerful position to handle that and to bring joy now, even if you are going to be working for a long time. So bravo to you for the action and all the remuneration. So I think there's a lot of lessons for all of us to learn in Sarah's case study. Thank you, Sarah. Let's move on and answer some of your questions. Now it's time to answer some of your questions. If you have a question for the show, you can go to askroger.me and you can type in your question, or you can leave an audio question, and we'll do our best to help you take a baby step here on the show. So our first question comes from a young'un, Lucas, on celebrating a milestone. Hey, Roger, Happy New Year. It's April. Happy New Year, Lucas. My wife is 33. I am 33. We have young people that listen to the show. This is like my kids, your kids. How awesome is that? We are about 6 months away from paying off our mortgage, our 30-year fixed rate mortgage. We've been incredibly blessed with our incomes, ability to save, lack of catastrophes over the last 4 years. It's a good thing that you recognize that, Lucas. And are coming down the home stretch. What are some things I should be taking into account as we come closer to the last payment? I definitely need to start a sinking fund to keep track of insurance and tax costs in the future. But what else should I be thinking of? I heard some issues getting liens removed or getting titles from the mortgage company, etc. Great work. Well, bravo, Lucas and unnamed wife. Congratulations on getting your mortgage paid off. I think you have some of the technical stuff. You want to start a sinking fund for your insurance and your real estate. The way that I like to do that, Lucas, is I like to have a separate savings account that I work at pre-funding. And then when the bills come due, I pay it out of that account. And then I go back to building that up through divvying up my cash flow. So I think you got that down. You're right. You're going to want to make sure you get the lien removed and get a clean title on the mortgage, etc. But what do you do after paying off the mortgage? Number one is you got to celebrate. And I'm not just talking, let's buy a nice bottle of wine or go to dinner. I mean, those are great things, but what can you do to accentuate this moment for the two of you? Good book called The Power of Moments that talks about this. This is an opportunity, not just simply to toast, we paid off our mortgage, but to reaffirm that what you had to go through to do that, maybe working a little harder, denying yourself certain things, managing catastrophes, avoiding unforced spending errors, to reconfirm, hey, that's like us. This is who we are. This is part of our family culture that we want to pass on, I don't know if you have kids or not, to kids, to community, etc. People can do this. And I think you want to accentuate this. So what do? Well, celebrate. The next big question is, okay, what do you do with this manna of a monthly payment that you no longer have to make? So let's assume that it was, I don't know, $2,000 a month, or maybe it sounds like you must have been front loading this. Maybe you were throwing lots of money at this. So let's assume it's $5,000 a month that you no longer have to throw to this mortgage. The next big question is, what do you do with that outside of getting the lien and deed and safe deposit box or whatever? What do you do with that money? Let's assume it's $5,000 as an example. I think you and your wife need to walk through what's next because you're still young. What do you do in building family wealth? So there's only 5 things you can do with money. And whenever there's an inflow of money, regardless of where you're at, you want to go through these 5 options to intentionally decide where you put that bonus, that inheritance, in this case, that monthly payment that you no longer have to make. So what are the 5 things that you can do with money? Number 1, you can spend it. Now, spending for massive savers feels dirty, right? But Lucas, any dollar you save today is deferral for your future self or future children or future family, which is very important. That dude is important, that 50, 60-year-old Lucas. But you know what? 33-year-old Lucas is pretty important too. It is okay to spend money to enhance the quality of your life. Usually the best place to start there is decreasing resistance so you have more time to do the things that you want to do. As an example, if you hate cleaning the house, maybe you spend a little bit of money on a house cleaner every 2 weeks. You hate mowing the lawn, maybe you hire somebody to mow the lawn. That can seem frivolous, but that's going to save you hours of your week to go ride your bike, go serve the community, to do whatever else you want to do. So number 1 is you can spend money. Number 2 is you can pay down debt. You've tackled the mortgage. My guess is if you've tackled the mortgage, you probably don't have any other debt. Usually we tackle credit cards and car payments, etc. That would be the second one. Spend it, pay down debt. Third one could be save it. Now, saving it, we already talked about part of that is setting up a sinking fund for the real estate and the insurance and taxes, setting up a separate sinking fund for that. That could be part of where this $5,000 a month goes, is to replenish those for when those premiums and taxes come due. So there's, I think, a great option. You could also set up a sinking fund for the new windows you need to get in 4 years, the pool you want to create in the backyard, whatever else you have forecasted over the next year. So windows need to be replaced, you have the money there. Much like a well-run homeowners association would do. They have sinking funds for all the things that they have to fix later in life, updating the kitchen at some point. So you could go down that route of doing these sinking funds for specific purposes. The nice thing about those, I'll tell you from my end, I think of my mother-in-law who's in her 80s. She's getting new countertops. They bought that house in 87 and have lived in it and grown old in it. She's in her 80s now. If you walked into that house, it looks up to date. So if and when she ever wanted to sell that house, it's not over-cluttered. All the countertops are current. They've replaced the floors. You're not walking into the 70s show when you walk into their house. So there's value in doing that because it may give you more flexibility later on. So those are things you could save money. The other thing you could do, so what do we have? We have spend it, we have pay down debt, we have save it. The other thing you could do with some of that $5,000 is invest it, right? Invest for future Lucas and spouse and children if they're not here already. And that could be in 401ks, it could be in Roths, it could be in Roth 401ks, it could be in after-tax savings. And then below that is the decision tree of what specifically you put it into. But that's the fourth thing, is you can invest it for future us. And the last thing you could do with money is give it away, whether that's to your church or to a charity or people that you want to support. You could give it away. All 5 of those options are on the table for this assumed $5,000 a month increase in your monthly cash flow. So you and your wife obviously are very diligent. So go through and make a decision of where all this money goes. And then you can revisit that as you have your little conversations around money. I just don't want you to ignore the celebration and maybe treating yourself in a way that makes it special. So our next question comes from Jay, wondering about investing in retirement with a pension. Hey, Roger, I really enjoy the podcast, and it has been a great tool to help me navigate pre-retirement, early retirement years. I am 61 years old. I've been retired for about 2 years. My career as an educator has provided me a pension for life that covers my base great life. Almost, he says. All my basic needs and wants are covered. I really want to fund big travel and leave a bit of money for my daughter down the road. I have a traditional IRA, a Roth IRA, and a brokerage account. My question is about diversification. I am very aggressively invested across these accounts with 90% stocks and 10% cash. I do not own bonds, and I viewed my pension as a sort of bond component of my portfolio. In short, I've looked at my pension as the foundation that allows me to invest more aggressively. So the question is, am I being too aggressive? Am I missing something that bonds could do for me? I have a fairly high risk tolerance, but am human, and big market swings are unsettling, but I always stay the course. What are your thoughts on this? Well, Jay, that's a great question. What's the purpose of bonds, and how does it fit into a retirement plan, a decumulation plan, spending plan? You can back into solving this by looking at your priorities and your cash flow. So you say you have your base great life covered from your pension. So that's an almost, you put in there in quotes or in parentheses. So you're in a wonderful position for your base great life, and it sounds like some of your wants, just from the pension. Depending on the type of pension you have, if it's not inflation adjusted, that will change over time. It will likely change over time. So you would want to do some forecasting of how does that gap get bigger for my 71-year-old self 10 years from now. In addition, you may have extraordinary spending outside of those wants and wishes. I would argue that you want to forecast what are some of those extraordinary spending that you're going to want to do within the next 5 years. Let's just use that as a window. Let's use some real numbers here for fun. Let's assume that your base great life costs you $100,000 a year. All right. You have $100,000 a year pension, and so you're covered. But you know you want to travel at $10,000 a year above that, and you want to buy a new car for cash in 3 years, and that's going to be $40,000. Let's just use those two. So now we have $50,000, $10,000 a year extra travel for 5 years that you know you're going to need. That's not coming from your pension. And you have a $40,000 car you're going to want to buy in year 3. So you have $90,000, and you could do the inflation adjustment, add taxes in there, et cetera. That is not going to be covered by your pension. So in my process, what I would recommend is that you have $90,000 pre-funding those things. So you could have the $10,000 a year in travel. You could build a CD ladder or a treasury ladder where the money is coming due at the beginning of each year. That's a bond, and you're going to earn interest on it. And then the car, assuming that it's fairly high resolution that you're going to need a car, you could put that into a CD or a treasury that comes due in 3 years or what have you. And so now if you look at the rest of your assets, you've determined that $90,000 a year you're actually going to need over the next 5 years to fund these goals, these extra goals that aren't being covered by your pension. And so that is where it's appropriate for bonds, because you're going to earn interest almost at the inflation rate. Inflation isn't a huge risk early in short-term periods, right? On the short term, inflation's not a big issue. It's only very long-term that inflation is a huge risk because of the diminishing spending power. What the bigger risk is on the short term is that sequence of return, having to sell at the wrong time. So the way that I would approach it is how I described. Once you have that $90,000 set aside for that travel and that car, the rest of the money you know you're not going to need for at least 5 years, absent any shocks. So that can be very aggressive. So how aggressive is going to be based on your more traditional risk tolerance and your appetite and how funded your plan is. But I think it's perfectly appropriate in some situations to have 90% stocks, because over a 5-year time frame, you give that kind of portfolio better odds of giving you better outcomes. And I say that even more for you, Jay, because even if you have a horrible 5 years, you still have your pension that's covering your base great life. So you're more secure in the fact that if I have to wait longer and maybe not do some of those extraordinary things. So it's okay. But ultimately, what you want to do, I believe, in building a retirement allocation is to build it from the inside out, to have clarity on at least the next 5 years. And that is where bonds are appropriate because it's going to give you interest and you know exactly when you're getting your money back. Inflation shouldn't be that big of an issue on the short term. It's the long-term part that inflation is the issue. And then when you get to your long-term portfolio, I'm not saying everybody should have a 90-10 stock to bond portfolio or an 80-20. You may not need all that growth. I believe in minimum effective dose of risk when it comes to growth, meaning that the only reason to take risk is because you can tolerate it and you never panic, what you said, but also because you need it and you don't need it. So if you take it, you know that you're just doing it because you want to. I don't need to skydive. I've done it once. I don't need to skydive, but I take in the risk because I like the joy and it should be fun, but there's a risk there. Same type of concept. So Jay, I wouldn't worry about the traditional mode when it comes to this. Obviously, you have worry about the security of your pension. The inflation is an issue that you want to account for in building your plan of record, but don't think that you're way off track based on the fact set that you gave us. So we're going to end this segment with a comment on how somebody is incorporating the Die with Zero methodology, which is a book by Bill Perkins that we've talked about, into their gifting strategy. So let's hear from Joe.
Hey, Roger, this is Joe in New Jersey. Mostly a comment. First off, I really appreciate everything you do. Your podcasts are outstanding. So you guys were talking recently about the book Die with Zero. Anyway, let me just cut to the chase here. While there is reference about, how to spend your money, how to live your life and everything, one key takeaway I had was about your children's inheritance. My kids are both married, a couple of kids, brand new homes. And the bottom line is that this is really the ideal time they could use the money. So what I've been trying to do is looking at my annual returns. Actually, I just started this, looking at my annual returns and based on how I do, try to gift them a little bit more because in the book, they talk about the ideal age for gifting, according to some poll anyway, is between the age 26 to 35. And that's clearly because that's probably the time when their kids are getting married and creating new families, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when they could really appreciate the cash infusion. Thank you for everything you do, Roger. Take care. Bye.
So I like that approach, Joe. And I think it's definitely a good framework of doing it. It gives you some structure for that decision making. And I would also argue that having a plan of record, Joe, so you can have clarity and more confidence on giving earlier and knowing that you'll be okay will help in, even if you have a flat market and you still want to speak into your children's life that way, in a positive way, that you can do it without upsetting the cart in terms of your retirement. So thanks so much for sharing that framework. With that, let's move on to talk about rucking in a very enthusiastic way with Dr. Bobby DuBois in our Rock Life segment. Now it's time for the Rock Life segment. We're going to focus on the health pillar today, or energy, with Dr. Bobby DuBois. Hey, Bobby, how you doing?
I'm ready to go rucking.
I just did yesterday for an hour. And that's what we're going to talk about today is the value of rucking. So let's start off with what is rucking?
Yes, we can keep this really simple. Rucking is nothing more than walking with some weight on your back.
I can do both of those things.
That's all it is. And it's having a simple backpack. Doesn't have to be fancy. Putting some weight in it. We'll talk a bit about the specifics. And then just walk. You had Michael Easter on last week, and he's a huge proponent of rucking. And I hope at the end of this, some of you will be motivated to give it a try.
I really enjoyed it. I discovered it, I think, last year sometime. And of course, walking with weight on your back, if we name it rucking, as we like to do, now I have a lot of rucking gear. We can maybe talk a little bit about that.
Always a chance to buy stuff.
So why should we even consider rucking?
Yeah, a lot of different reasons. Let me just give a little bit of background so that people kind of know where this came from. Yes, it's become very popular, but it's been around probably for millennia. I think the Romans would train with weight on their back. It's been a backbone of military training forever, and it still is. Even in our modern military approaches, carrying weight on your back, lots for those people, lots of weight on your back has been shown to be very beneficial. And we'll talk a bit about, of course, the science behind that. It's becoming incredibly popular. There are groups in most towns. There's events. I wouldn't call them races, but I'd call them events. You and I went to Costa Rica. We couldn't just do it in our backyard. We had to go to Costa Rica to do it. There was a few other elements tied to it, but yes, we did that. And it's wonderful. It's not going to solve global warming or world hunger, but it's another activity to put in our toolkit of being healthy.
One thing
a lot of people didn't know what pickleball was, and they were like, I'm not doing that pickleball thing. Of course, it's the fastest growing sport in North America. And then they tried it, and it was like, oh, this is really fun on a whole host of levels. Here's something else to try, and I hope everybody might give it a go.
One thing I like about rucking is that it's just walking with weight, right? And I walk every day. We walk the dog together. And so it's a very simple thing to do. It doesn't take a lot of equipment, and it's not like changing normal rhythms because most of us go for a walk every day. So why should we consider it as we're thinking about our energy?
Wonderful. And I love that word consider. And that's all we can ask is that you consider it. And of course, if you try it and you like it, send us a message about that. If you try it and you hate it, I would say don't send us a message. But of course, I really would want to hear from you as well. So we've talked over and over and over again about the 6 pillars to live long and well, where exercise is the first and perhaps the most impactful lever. Well, there are other pillars that, believe it or not, can be done at the exact same time you're doing the work of rucking. So we've talked about strength training. We're going to come back to that. We're talking about bone health. We'll come back to that. We'll talk about social interactions. We'll talk about core strength. And these are all things, believe it or not, that can happen while rucking. And if you do it out in nature, of course, then you get the benefits of the mind-body harmony by being out in nature. So those are sort of at the very high level. And then, of course, now we want to go through each one. And I'll try to share some science that this actually makes some sense.
I love the idea of habit stacking. I think that's what they call that, where you're accomplishing a number of things.
Well, then let us go and habit stack.
So what is the science around this in terms of a benefit?
Well, everybody probably has heard from us that you need to get aerobic exercise on a daily, weekly basis. And again, the guidelines are anywhere from 150 minutes to 200, 300 minutes of aerobic exercise. Of course, there's no upper bound. You can do even more, and that's great. And a lot of people like to jog, and I do too. I love it. But when you think about the impact on our joints, and you say to yourself, well, maybe I should run or maybe I should ruck. Oh, it's all about the same thing. There is an area that's completely different. So when you run, the force when you hit the ground is 6 to 8 times your body weight. So if you weigh 150 pounds, that's over 1,000 pounds that are banging on your hips and your knees and your ankles and your forefoot and all the rest. When you walk, instead of 6 to 8 fold, it's 1.2 fold. So a whole lot less. Now, of course, as we said with rucking, you're putting weight on your back. So you got to add that in there too. So if you're putting 20 pounds of weight in your backpack, then that'll be the equivalent of 30 pounds. But that's a whole lot less than 1,000 pounds with running. Now, I'm not saying stop running, but this is one reason why you might consider it, because if you have any problems with your bones or joints, this would be a way of getting that same aerobic benefit without some of the harms associated with it. So that's the first reason to consider it.
And I can personally relate to that standpoint of I've had 3 knee surgeries and I have difficulty running for any period of time and really pay the price and have not had that issue at all with rucking.
That's wonderful. Well, there's a testimonial, and obviously there's science around the issue of weight and force development on your joints. So that's the first thing. The second thing, we've talked as part of the 4 elements of exercise, an element which is strength training, especially of your core. And of course, we have to quote a study. So there was a study of women that were above age 65. They were 65 to 74, and they did 6 weeks of a stair climbing regimen where they wore a vest, weight that they did. And what they found after 6 weeks, which is a pretty short amount of time, was that their lower limb power, which they measured, went up by 10%. And the speed that they could do the stair climbing weighted vest went up by 9%. And we can have the links in the show notes if people want to see this. So yes, this wasn't outdoor rucking. This is slightly different, but it again tells us the same rucking while you're walking the dog or going to the grocery store now can strengthen key parts of our body. You get it for free just by doing the rucking. I think that's wonderful.
What other benefits do we have? We haven't hit on this in terms of core because we talked about core strength. And I don't have a study in front of me, but my understanding is that core strength becomes more critical as we get older. I think it's critical all the time, but as we get older, core strength is one of the core strengths that we should have built.
I think that's right. I think first and foremost, it will help us in preventing falls. And as we've talked about before, falls are a really, really bad harbinger of things happening health-wise that are not good. So that's one of the key points. And as you look at people that are frail, they're often bent over. Now, there's lots of reasons for that, one of which is lack of core strength. Getting out of a chair as we age, all of that's core strength. Getting up off of the ground is core strength. Core strength is really, really important. And if rucking can help us without having to do a core strength or whatever, this is really great benefit. Now, it's not in lieu of doing an entire strength program, but it will help in the process. So the third element is bone mineral density. One of the advantages of running, although it has problems with your joints, is the jarring actually causes remodeling of your bones and increases bone mineral density. Now, men often don't worry about bone mineral density. Women often do because the hormone shifts in women. They are more likely to get osteopenia, which is thinning of the bones, or osteoporosis, which is thinning that's gone beyond a certain point. So there have been rucking, or what they call weighted vest or carriage loading studies that show improvements in bone mineral density in postmenopausal women. No studies yet in men, but osteopenia is important in men too as we get older, and no reason to think it wouldn't help us in men as well as women. So that's the third.
And the last one we get, you basically do it outside, right? Well, not the last one, but the next one, you're outside. When I walk outside rucking, it's probably one of my only times outside during the day, especially during the work week.
We have talked about in the mind-body space, you can meditate, you can do breath work, you can do meditative yoga. All of these have been shown to have benefits, whether it's blood pressure benefits, mood benefits, or whatever. And we talked about this interesting study where they took people and had them walk around the city or had them walk around a city park with greenery. And the people that were walking around the park had a lot more benefits than the people walking around in the city in terms of mood and anxiety and those kinds of things. So as you said, yes, you can ruck on a treadmill, but lots of people like to ruck outdoors, and you can do it in a park. You can do it anywhere. And the studies have shown, not specific to rucking, but your self-esteem and mood increases by being outdoors in nature. And again, it's the same rucking. You get the benefits for your bones, you get the benefits aerobic, you get the core strength. And here you might feel more in balance, mind, body, and feel better about yourself and have a higher mood. So that's another one you get for free just by doing it outdoors as well. And then, of course, you can do it with people. And we've talked about how important social relations are for living long and functionally. And the Harvard study showed that this was an extraordinary predictor at age 55 for who would do well in their 70s and beyond. So grab a friend. They don't have to ruck. They can just walk, or they can ruck, and you both do it outdoors in nature, and think of all these additive benefits. And if all of this wasn't enough, I feel like I'm selling something.
This is like a commercial for rucking, which is wonderful.
And if that's not enough, we'll include in your order, it's fun. It is fun, and you will enjoy it. Even if it didn't have all the other benefits, it's fun. Now, people might say, well, Dr. Bobby, I already have a great exercise program. I don't need to ruck. And I would say to you, cross-training is always beneficial. If you jog, try this. If you like to play basketball, try this. If you like to swim or play pickleball, try this. Mixing up your exercise uses different muscles and uses different parts of your brain. And that is a benefit. Even if you are running outdoors in nature, give this a try and let us know what you think.
I also think, and it does sound like a commercial because I think we believe in it. So we'll talk about how to get started. But I also think if you don't have an exercise program, it really is just walking with having something you're carrying in some way. It could be a purse backpack. It could be a backpack with your computer in it. It doesn't have to get overly fancy. I literally got a text. I wanted to share this because I think this goes to the point of rucking and why it's so approachable. Man, this does sound like a commercial, but that's okay. It's a good thing. A good friend of mine from the club, Scott, texted me about something that I had mentioned when we had a meetup in Philadelphia like a year ago. He had heard me say something, I think we were at Staples carrying something, and about opportunities to move. I call them OTMs. You know, if you have to carry something out of Staples, well, that's an OTM. That's an opportunity to move. If I have to go to a grocery store, I park farther away, give myself an opportunity to move. Michael Easter, who I learned about rucking from, and I think you did too, who was on just a few weeks ago, is about just have opportunities to move, get outside more. And I think it lends itself to all that. So I like this idea of OTMs, and rucking is definitely one of them.
Absolutely.
All right. So how do we do this? Do we have to buy all the gear that I did, or can you do this with or without that?
It's easy. Voltaire had this wonderful saying that I remind myself all the time, let not the great be the enemy of the good. Now, he actually said it in French, and he said it in a nicer way, or at least with more flowery language. But the concept is, it doesn't have to be the perfect solution. It's really, really easy. And if you don't know what to do, it doesn't take much more than what you and I have talked about. But there are local rucking groups, or go on a Sierra Club hike or anywhere, and you can join them and have a rucksack. Okay, so what kind of pack do you need? Anything will work. You know, you could borrow your little kid's tiny backpack if you wish. Most everybody has some sort of backpack that they take on an airplane or on a trip in the car to take some snacks. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to have a belly, hip strap. It doesn't have to have anything. Just any kind of thing will do. Now, look, if you get excited, there's a whole company dedicated to rucking. It's called Go Ruck. Both you and I know the owner and many of the people there. We have no financial interest one way or the other, but they're good people, and they have really special packs that you can put plates, like plates that you'd put on weight, not dumbbells, but barbells that fit into that kind of thing. But again, let's just start with something simple. Okay, you don't have any fancy weights? I suspect you go to the market periodically and buy sugar. You might buy the 5-pound bag. You might buy the 10-pound bag. Stick one of those in the backpack. And look, you're done. Now you can ruck. You've got your inexpensive backpack. You've got your sugar. You've got a bottle of water, whatever it is that will give you a little bit of weight, and go outside and walk for 20 minutes. Walk for 10 minutes.
So see
how you feel. See if it's fun.
So how much should we start with weight-wise?
Ultimately, if you work your way up and you really, really enjoy this, you might get up to 20 or 25% of your body weight. So ultimately, that could look like 30 pounds or so. And that's when I ruck, I ruck with 30 pounds. But when you start, try 5 pounds. You work your way up to 10 pounds and then 15 pounds. Again, start as simple as you want. Look, if you go out with 5 pounds and you say, this is ridiculous, I can go up a bunch, then go up a bunch. Or don't even go outside. Go on a treadmill. Of course, I think outside is good because you get the nature stuff. But walk your dog. If you want to impress people, go to the market and people might say, oh, what are you doing? And you'd say, I'm rucking and getting my opportunity to move kinds of things.
Now, some of the potential downsides or risks that I think we need to address that too. I think one is, from my own experience, is you're going to have pressure on your shoulders, and we're not always used to that. So I think scaling up from a weight standpoint. The other was the shoes. You want to have, I don't know if running shoes are really the best shoes, probably more flat shoes, but those are the two areas when I would ruck for an hour that I discovered, while I'm getting a little numbness in my arm, I got to make sure my pack is adjusted correctly. And then my feet, because I wasn't used to, one, probably walking for an hour every day, but second, doing it with any weight. So I think it's definitely important to scale up.
I think that's a great set of recommendations. And absolutely, your feet, do take good care of your feet. I mean, if you have hiking boots, you can wear hiking boots, of course. If you have sturdy walking shoes.
Stiffer shoes, I think. Yes, stiffer shoes is at least my experience.
And if you have troubles, if it's hurting your feet, go to the shoe store or the REI and talk to them. Of course, there are rucking dedicated shoes if you get very excited, but you don't need that kind of thing.
So how do we measure this?
Get going.
Yeah, how do we measure this?
Go ahead.
How do we measure this?
Well, first, I want to sort of guide people on how do you work your way up. So one element is you increase the weight. You can also increase the time. And if you were walking on flat ground, walk up a hill. All of those are things you can do. If you really want to get your heart rate up, you could try shuffling. So walking versus running, when you're running, both feet are off the ground at some point in time. Everybody knows how to walk, and at least one foot is on the ground. Shuffling is moving as fast as you possibly can, but still having one foot on the ground. So you're not jogging. If you want to shuffle, your heart rate will go up really high, really quick. So you can definitely get your heart rate wherever you want it while you're increasing the rate or the distance or whatever. So those are all different ways to work your way up, but do it gradually. Like all things, don't jump up too quickly, and that way you'll avoid injuries.
So now let's get to measuring. We go back to what is sort of the core of everything you talk about, Bobby, which is a trial of one.
Yes, I can quote statistics all day long, and I would be more than happy to do that. But at the end of the day, as the saying goes, it's all about me, or in this case, all about you. So is it really going to help you? Now, I don't minimize fun. You may just say, this is fun and cool. I'm not sure if it does anything else for me, but it's fun and cool, and that's good enough for you. But if you want to have something tangible that you can measure and say, I started this rucking thing, and a month or 6 weeks later, this is what I've noticed. Now, of course, that's motivational. You do well at something and you want to do more of it. Okay, so let's say you're not a big exerciser and you're going to do this. So pick a weight, pick a distance and a course around your neighborhood and do it. And there's a thing called RPE, which is your rating of perceived exertion. Simplistically, how hard is it? So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 obviously is flat out. You can't handle this for more than 10 seconds. 6 or 7 is like, this is real work and I can talk, but I can't talk that well. I got to sort of stop, catch my breath, and then say another sentence. So give it a number. Okay, so I did this 20 minute. It took, I did about a mile, and I give myself a 6 or a 7, whatever it is. And then you may increase the weight, you may increase the distance, you may increase the hills, come back a month later and go back to the lower weight, the lower hill incline, just go back to the original course, do it again and see, oh my God, it was 6 before. Now it's a 3. It's so easy. Okay, you've done better. Now you could time it. You're like, it took me 20 minutes before. Now it takes me 16 minutes. Look at your resting heart rate. Oh, gosh, my resting heart rate used to be 76 and now it's down to close to 70. Or if you have blood pressure issues, do your blood pressure for a few days, come back 6 weeks later and see what it is. There are mood questionnaires, sleep questionnaires. Look at your weight. Look at all these kinds of things. Measure it, on April 2nd, and then come back on May 2nd and see where it is. So if you're new to exercise, you're likely going to see some stuff here that might change.
What comes to mind here are 2 words. One is intentionality, and 2 is awareness. I like the idea of an RPE, or of just how do I feel? Can I talk while I'm doing it? Whereas am I able to talk is a good one. It doesn't have to get any more scientific than that, I don't think.
That is a very nice overall assessment. But if you want more numbers like nerd like me, those are helpful. Now, people might say, well, Dr. Bobby, I already have a great exercise regimen. All right. So you've probably improved your baseline heart rate, done all the other things that are good, like your sleep is getting better because you're exercising. So is rucking going to help? Yes, for all the reasons we talked about. What can you measure for that? Well, we know that the rucking is going to work on your lower extremities. So before you start rucking, how many squats can you do? Or how many sit-ups can you do? Or if you do a hang test where you sort of basically hold on to a pull-up bar and see how long you can do that for, or how long you can stand on one leg. Now, these are more advanced things, but you've already said, I already exercise. So, of course, I want to give you some more advanced things and then come back a month or 6 weeks later and do those same things. RPE is wonderful for everybody. And then try the squats or the hang test or any of these other things and see, because the type of improvements might manifest in these things and it might excite you and amaze you, which of course is what we want to do.
I think this is the most enthusiastic Rock Life segment on energy that we've had. It's important that we have a disclaimer, and that is the only vested interest that we have in being so excited about rucking is you having the energy to show up to your life and to your family. That's the only interest we have in this. But obviously, we're big believers in it.
For so many reasons, and probably the most important reason, it's fun. It is just fun to do it.
On your marks, get set.
Now it's time to set a baby step you can take in the next 7 days to not just rock retirement, but rock life. All right, in the next 7 days, it's springtime. Beautiful out here in Texas. The next walk that you go on, put on a backpack. Throw a couple books in there. Don't make it too heavy. And just walk with something on your back and see how you feel. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'm really excited to do more of these little mini case studies. We're doing one coming up here in the coming weeks with a gentleman who he and his wife moved into the Villages full-time last fall. And we're going to talk about that experience and the logic behind that decision. So excited to do that. Perhaps if you have an idea for a little mini case study, maybe a journey that you're on, go ahead and go to askroger.me and you can send us a message and we'll see if we can include it on a future show. As always, we're going to try to explore this topic with integrity, curiosity, and courage so we can all focus on rocking retirement. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance reference is historical and does not guarantee future results. All indices are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. Make sure you consult your legal, tax, or financial advisor before making any decisions.